Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Evan Mercer, and the Dustwood Farm was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet project on weekends. I never planned on living underground, counting air filters and diesel hours while listening to footsteps above my head. When I started digging under my grandfather's old farmhouse in southern Missouri, I did it because I liked structure and control. The world outside was messy, my tunnels were not. Dustwood Farm sat on about 22 acres outside a small town south of Springfield. The nearest paved road was County Road 7, a two-lane strip that cut through soybean fields and patches of oak woods. My grandfather had worked this land until his health went bad. When he passed, the farmhouse and land came to me because I was the only family member willing to drive out here, mow the grass, and tighten loose boards. I worked as a structural engineer for a regional construction firm in Springfield. I drew plans for warehouses and evaluated foundations for commercial buildings. It was stable work, but I never trusted the idea that the world would always stay stable. Storms, floods, economic crashes, power outages. I had seen enough job sites ruined by bad planning or unexpected events to convince me that redundancy was not paranoia. So when I inherited the farmhouse, I saw more than peeling paint and a sagging porch. I saw a chance to build a backup plan. The root cellar behind the house had collapsed on one side. Most people would have filled it in. I measured the crack, tested the soil, and decided it was the perfect place to start. Over 3 years of weekends and vacation days, I reinforced that old cellar and turned it into a concealed entrance. I poured new concrete walls inside the old ones, installed steel supports, and framed out a stairwell that led deeper. I did the work myself, one step at a time. I used my professional contacts to buy extra bags of cement, steel rebar, and surplus building materials without raising eyebrows. When the underground area grew too large to be a simple storm shelter, I stopped calling it that. Even in my head, it was a bunker, and I knew it. By the time the world started to fall apart, the main room underground was about the size of a small apartment. It had a low ceiling with concrete beams, painted white to reflect the light from LED panels. Along one wall, I had mounted metal shelves loaded with labeled bins, canned vegetables, dry rice, beans, pasta, instant potatoes, vitamins, first aid supplies. Against another wall stood a row of batteries wired into a charge controller that linked up to a discrete set of solar panels hidden inside the collapsed barn. The panels faced south through gaps in the roof, disguised beneath rusted corrugated metal and old wood. To see them clearly, someone would have to climb into the barn and look from just the right angle. In the far corner, I built a small workshop with a sturdy bench, a mounted vise, drawers of hand tools, and a pegboard full of wrenches, screwdrivers, and power tools. Next to that, I set up a compact diesel generator with a separate exhaust line, insulated and routed through a vertical shaft that exited far from the farmhouse, disguised as a broken fence post. For air, I installed a ventilation system built from repurposed heating and cooling components. Air came in through an intake pipe buried along the tree line, passed through filters, and moved into the bunker through quiet fans. A second pipe vented stale air out near the dried-up creek bed. Both pipes were lined with mesh and check valves to keep anything from crawling in. Water came from an unused well on the property. I ran concealed PVC piping from the wellhead, buried under the weeds, down into the bunker's utility room. A shallow well pump fed a pressure tank and a 2-stage filtration system with sediment and carbon filters. There was also a gravity-fed backup tank in case the pump failed. On paper, it was overbuilt. In reality, it would never feel like enough. The emergency exit was the last thing I finished. It tunneled from the far end of the bunker toward the cornfield on the north side of the property, rising gently until it surfaced beneath a rusted, abandoned grain chute near the edge of the field. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten piece of farm equipment sinking into the soil. From the inside, it was a sliding steel hatch and a narrow stairway up. For 3 years, this was a hobby. Then the news stream started to shift. At first, it was just headlines, unusual clusters of aggressive illness reported in urban hospitals, footage of emergency rooms in Kansas City under strain, reports of strange behavior in patient notes. My co-workers rolled their eyes and called it another round of media panic. I watched the footage without joking. The behavior of the hospitalized people did not look like a normal medical crisis. Security had to restrain them. They did not react to pain the way I expected. There was an urgency behind the way doctors moved in those clips that bothered me. Within a week, there were more serious changes. Short official statements mentioned a fast-spreading condition. Flights were delayed or cancelled. News anchors switched from cheerful tones to tight professional ones. Words like quarantine, containment, and emergency protocol appeared more often. Maps behind the anchors filled with red circles expanding around major cities. Kansas City went into a formal state of emergency, and that caught my full attention. Springfield was only a few hours away from it by car. I checked my inventory lists for the Dustwood farm and realized that for all my planning, I still spent most of my time in a small apartment in town, trusting that city systems would keep working. That trust no longer felt reasonable. On the last day I went into the office, my supervisor tried to keep the tone normal. He reviewed deadlines, pretended that the growing crisis on every screen was just a temporary disruption. During lunch, I watched live footage of a highway outside St. Louis, where drivers had abandoned vehicles in the middle of the road. In the background, something moved between the cars. The camera operator zoomed in and the feed cut off. It did not come back. That evening, I loaded my truck. I brought tools, extra fuel cans, a few more deep cycle batteries, and every bag of dry food I had in my small pantry. I called the few people I knew in town and told them, calmly, to get out to the countryside if they could. Some laughed it off. Some said they would think about it. One asked if she could come to the farm with me, then hesitated and hung up before deciding. No one arrived at my door before I pulled away. The drive out to Dustwood Farm took a little over an hour. Traffic was heavier than usual at first, then thinned out as the sky turned a dim shade of orange. There were more state police vehicles on the road. I saw a convoy of ambulances headed towards Springfield. At a gas station on the edge of town, every pump had a line. I still stopped and topped off my tank, filling the extra fuel cans I had in the bed of the truck. People argued loudly at the pumps. No one looked anyone else in the eye for long. By the time I turned onto County Road 7, the sun had dropped below the tree line. Dustwood Farm came into view as a shape against the deeper dark. The old house with its sagging roof, the collapsed barn, the silent fields. I felt a steady sense of focus settle over me as I pulled into the gravel drive. This place had always been a project. Now it was home. I parked beside the house, killed the engine, and listened. The night was quiet except for insects and a light breeze. No distant highway sounds reached this far. That silence, for the first time, felt unnerving instead of peaceful. I unlocked the back door, stepped inside, and locked it again behind me. The house still smelled faintly of dust and old wood. I went room to room, checking boarded windows and dead-bolted doors. I had reinforced most of them over the years, installing steel brackets in the frames and adding screws through the boards into the studs. Everything would hold long enough for me to get below. Down in the root cellar, the air was cooler. The entrance to the bunker was concealed behind an old set of shelves stacked with crates. I slid the shelf aside on its hidden rollers, revealing the steel door inset in the concrete wall. A keypad and mechanical deadbolt secured it. I entered the code, turned the handle, and stepped through into the stairwell. When the door closed behind me, the outside world became a memory. The bunker lights came on with a low hum. LED strips along the ceiling brightened gradually to avoid startling my eyes. I walked through the main room, checking each system. The battery bank read nearly full, charged from a clear day. The water pressure gauge sat comfortably in the green zone. The air intake fans spun quietly, drawing in night air through the filters. My watch read just after 9 in the evening. I went back upstairs to the house long enough to carry down the last of my gear, then sealed the inner door again. That was the last time, for a while, that I moved freely between the house and the underground space without hesitation. The next 3 days marked the collapse. I had a flat panel television mounted on the bunker wall, connected to a small rooftop antenna and a backup cable run. At first, the channels came in with only occasional stutters. I watched newscasters try to maintain calm as background footage grew more chaotic. Shots of Kansas City streets showed people running, emergency vehicles stuck behind stalled traffic, and individuals in hospital gowns, stumbling in ways that did not look natural. Commentators used careful language when they described the infected. They emphasized that this was a medical situation. They avoided terms that sounded final. On the second day, St. Louis went dark on the maps. The anchor desk spent several minutes on a prepared statement, then switched to reruns of old programs for a while. When they returned, the feed quality had dropped. The anchors looked tired. Behind them, the list of affected cities had grown. Springfield was included now, though only partially. The official guidance was to stay home, avoid contact, and wait for instructions. Cell phone networks started to fail. Calls dropped. Messages remained unsent. The last message I received came from a co-worker who wrote that he had seen someone in the parking lot at our office who did not react to being struck by a car. The person had gotten back up. The message ended mid-sentence. On the third day, the power grid blinked. Lights in the bunker flickered as the external power source cut out. A second later, my inverter kicked in and the system switched to battery power. I watched the indicator lights shift, then stabilize. The generator was ready as backup, but I wanted to reserve diesel for later. For now, the solar panels and batteries would be enough. When the television went dark, it did not come back. Only static and empty channels remained. The radio followed a similar pattern. Local stations repeated emergency messages, then cut off. The last clear broadcast I heard came from a station in Kansas City before it also went silent. The announcer's voice shook slightly as he urged listeners to avoid large groups and stay inside. Then white noise replaced his words. After that, the world was whatever I could see from the few cameras I had placed around Dustwood Farm. I had run thin cables through air vents and drilled discreet holes in window frames years earlier. Small cameras fed into a monitor in the bunker's main room. The feeds showed the porch, the driveway, the barn, and the back fields. For the first day after the power grid failed, those images remained unchanged. Still trees, empty drive, no headlights on the road. Then, in the late afternoon, an unfamiliar figure wandered down County Road 7. The person moved with an unsteady gait, arms loose at their sides. They wore a shirt and jeans stained with something dark and dried. When they reached the gravel entrance to the farm, they stopped for a moment, turning their heads slowly. Then they continued past, disappearing behind a stand of trees. A few minutes later, another figure staggered by in the same direction. By midnight, there had been 5. I had read enough online rumors before the networks crashed to know what they likely were. People who had been ill, who should have been lying still in hospital beds, were now walking without coordination or purpose. They did not seem to respond to pain or to the environment in a normal way. I tightened my grip on the edge of the control console and watched until the road cleared again. The sounds came on the morning of the 4th day. At first, I thought a branch had fallen on the roof. The impact was dull but heavy. I muted the small battery radio I was using to scan for any remaining broadcasts and listened. My watch showed a little after 6 in the morning. The bunker's air felt still and cool. For a moment, I heard nothing more. Then came another sound, something dragging across a wooden surface. I moved to the monitor and cycled through camera views. The porch was empty. The driveway showed only my truck. The barn feed was still, with slanting light coming through the broken roof panels. It took me several seconds to realize that the sound was not coming from outside. It was above me. The farmhouse. I grabbed the handheld monitor tied to 2 interior cameras I'd hidden inside the house itself. One looked down the hallway from the living room. The other faced the kitchen from the corner, high near the ceiling. I flicked through the views and froze. There were 3 of them in the kitchen. They stood near the table, moving slowly, heads turning in odd, searching motions. One wore a shirt and slacks that might have been office clothes. Another had on what looked like scrubs from a medical centre, stained and torn. The third wore a flannel shirt and jeans. Their skin was pale in a way that did not look like simple illness. Their eyes did not focus on anything. They moved in small, aimless steps, bumping into chairs and cabinets. I turned up the audio feed. Their shoes scraped against the wood floor. Occasionally, a low noise came from one of them, a dull, airless sound in the throat. There was no speech, no words, just aimless movement. My mind categorized them the way it knew how. They were not just sick, they were already lost. An open back door explained how they had entered. I must not have secured it fully when I moved everything downstairs in the dark. That mistake now meant that the farmhouse above my head was occupied. Panic would have been natural, but focus came instead. I needed them out of the house. The bunker's existence depended on no one discovering the reinforced entry in the root cellar. If the infected tore through enough walls and floors, they might expose something unusual. If later survivors or hostile groups searched the place and found any hint of the bunker, we would lose our main advantage. I counted 3 figures on the cameras. There could be more off-screen, but the layout of the house gave me some comfort. The doors were still closed to most of the rooms. Noise from the basement stairwell would draw them slowly, but not instantly. I had time to plan. I went to the locked cabinet in the toolroom and opened it. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a small semi-automatic rifle chambered in a common point .223 caliber. Both had been my grandfather's before they passed to my father and then to me. I had maintained them, cleaned them, and practiced with them at ranges on the edge of town under the cover of recreational use. In the bunker, I also kept a .22 caliber bolt-action rifle fitted with a small suppressor. That quieter rifle was meant for pest control around the farm, but right now it fit a different purpose. Noise control was important. A single loud shot could carry across the fields and draw more unwanted attention. The infected already in the house likely had limited hearing compared to healthy people, judging by the way they moved, but I did not want to test how far that difference went. The suppressed .22 would not be silent, but it would be far quieter than the shotgun. I loaded the .22, pocketed extra rounds, and pulled on a jacket. I strapped on a simple belt with a flashlight and a fixed blade knife. The knife was a last resort tool, not a primary plan. I checked that the bunker door mechanisms were clear and working. Then I climbed the stairs up to the root cellar, paused at the interior door that led into the basement of the farmhouse, and listened. Muffled scraping sounds reached me through the wood. Above, they moved slowly, still wandering. I pictured them in my head, using the camera images. The kitchen, the hallway, the living room. I needed to move past the bottom of the stairs, reach the main floor quietly, and deal with them one at a time before they understood that there was any new presence in the house. I unlocked the door, opened it a fraction of an inch, and waited. No sudden movement. No figures in immediate view at the top of the basement stairs. The basement itself was mostly empty. Concrete floor, old shelves, some plastic crates. I stepped through, closed the door gently behind me, and climbed the steps slowly, placing each foot carefully to avoid creaks. At the top, the narrow hallway to the kitchen lay ahead. Light filtered in faintly from a small window over the sink. I could hear one of them shifting weight from foot to foot. Another bumped into something and made that dull sound in its throat again. I rose high enough that my eyes cleared the level of the floor and I could see into the kitchen. One of the infected stood with its back to me, near the counter. Another stood in the doorway to the living room, head tilted to one side. The third was out of sight, likely behind the table. For the moment, none of them faced the stairs. I brought up the rifle, lining the sights on the back of the nearest figure's head. I had read enough studies in my professional curiosity to know that damage to the central nervous system was the only reliable way to stop people who continue to move despite severe injuries. In normal life, that knowledge applied to accident reconstruction and emergency planning. Now it applied directly to the thing in front of me. I exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The suppressor turned the report into a sharp crack instead of a thunderous blast. The figure jerked once and collapsed, dropping straight to the floor without any attempt to catch itself. The other two reacted slowly, turning their heads in oddly delayed motion. I cycled the bolt and fired again at the one in the doorway before it could orient fully toward me. It fell, striking the frame and sliding down. The third one finally started to move toward the sound. It stumbled around the far side of the table, arms raising as if sensing something rather than seeing it clearly. I had enough time to adjust my aim and place a third shot. When it dropped, the kitchen fell silent except for the faint jangle of a chair that had been nudged. I held my position on the stairs for a full minute, listening. No more movement came from the rest of the house. I stepped up onto the kitchen floor, checked each fallen figure to confirm complete stillness, and then moved through the other rooms carefully. Every door remained closed. Every boarded window stayed intact. Only the back door showed a gap where the latch had not caught properly. I fixed that, installing an extra latch I had meant to add for months. Cleaning up after the encounter was simple in a physical sense and difficult in a mental one. There were no visible features remaining in these people that marked them as the neighbors they might once have been. Still, I handled them with respect. I moved them to the basement using a sheet as an improvised stretcher, keeping my contact minimal and wearing gloves and a mask. I had no desire to test whether there was any lingering risk from contact. It was enough that they had already lost their awareness. I did not intend to join them. When the house was clear and secure again, I returned to the bunker, relocked the entrances, and sat down in the main room. My hands shook slightly as delayed reaction set in. I focused on little tasks, checking battery charge levels, logging my use of ammunition, marking times and details in a notebook. Routine calmed me. The farm felt more isolated than ever. That isolation cracked when I first heard the crash on the county road. It happened 2 days after the incident in the kitchen. The morning was clear. I was in the workshop, adapting a door sensor to act as a tripwire alarm out in the yard. The sensor's small magnet and reed switch could be wired to a buzzer in the bunker. A thin fishing line would complete the setup. If someone or something walked through the line, the magnet would move from the switch and trigger the buzzer. While I tested the circuit, a sound rolled faintly through the concrete walls. At first, I thought it was distant thunder. Then I heard the sharper, metallic sound of glass breaking. It came from the direction of the road, not the house. I moved to the monitor and cycled to the driveway camera. Trees blocked most of the road, but a gap gave me a partial view of the ditch. Through that gap, I saw the undercarriage of a vehicle that had come to rest at an angle. It looked like a compact wagon, tipped onto its side off the shoulder. The wheels on the exposed side still turned slowly. I hesitated only long enough to grab gear. If someone was still alive in that vehicle, ignoring it would mean watching another person fade while I was close enough to help. That idea was not acceptable, no matter how cautious I needed to be. I checked the exterior cameras for any infected on the property or road. No movement showed. I took the semi-automatic rifle this time, slinging it over my shoulder, and slipped on a vest with extra magazines and a basic medical kit. I added a small crowbar and a seatbelt cutter to my cargo pockets. Then I headed up, moving through the house and out the back door, locking it behind me. The morning sun made me squint after so much time under artificial lights. The air smelled of dry grass and dust. I moved along the side of the house, keeping low, then cut across the yard toward the gravel drive. At the edge of the property, I paused behind a cluster of trees and peered out at the road. The vehicle was a silver Subaru wagon lying partly in the ditch, nose pointed toward a shallow culvert. The windshield had a spiderweb pattern of cracks on one side. The driver's side airbag had deployed and hung limp. The rear hatch was open a crack. One of the tires still spun. I did not see any infected nearby. I did not see any movement inside the car at first either. Then I caught a slight motion through the shattered glass. Someone lifted an arm weakly and let it fall again. I stepped out onto the road, rifle ready but pointed down, and approached the car on the side away from the open ditch. As I neared the driver's window, I heard a faint voice. "Help!" It came from inside the car. The driver's side window was mostly broken out. A woman hung from her seatbelt, suspended at an angle by the way the car had tipped. Her hair was dark and stuck to her forehead with sweat. A thin line of blood from a small cut ran down over one eyebrow. But she was conscious, her eyes focused on me. "I am here," I said in a calm tone. "My name is Evan. I'm going to get you out. Are you hurt anywhere beside your head, neck, back, chest?" She blinked a few times, trying to concentrate. "My shoulder, left side, and my leg is stuck." Her pupils reacted normally to light. Her skin was pale, but not in the same way as the infected I had seen. There was no vacant stare, no unfocused wandering. She was aware and able to answer questions. That was enough to proceed. "Can you move your fingers and toes?" I asked. She flexed her hands. "Fingers, yes. Toes, I do not know. I cannot feel much in my leg. It might just be numb." I moved closer, steadying myself against the car. Using the crowbar, I cleared away the remaining glass from the window frame, avoiding letting shards fall onto her. I reached in, supporting her weight with one arm, while I used the seatbelt cutter to slice through the belt just above the latch. When it gave way, I took more of her weight, guiding her slowly as she shifted. Her left leg was wedged under the steering column. The force of the crash had twisted the dashboard slightly. I used the crowbar to pry the plastic away enough for her to drag her leg free. She gasped, but did not lose consciousness. "Anything feel broken?" I asked. "It hurts," she said through clenched teeth, "but I do not hear any grinding. I think it is just bruised." "Good. I'm going to pull you out now. I need you to hold on to me with your good arm." I braced myself, reached in, and lifted her as evenly as I could, guiding her through the window opening. She was lighter than I expected, probably from travel and stress. Once free of the car, I set her carefully on the grassy slope away from the ditch. We both paused, listening. No distant shouts, no stumbling footsteps. The only sounds were wind in the trees and the settling creaks of the damaged vehicle. "What happened?" I asked as I checked her leg for deformities. It was swollen at the shin and knee, but did not feel unstable under gentle pressure. I wrapped it with an elastic bandage from my kit for support. "I was trying to get out of Springfield," she said. "Traffic was blocked on the main highway, so I took side roads. Something ran out from the trees. I swerved and hit the ditch. I do not even know what day it is." "Day 4 since everything went quiet, far as I can tell," I said. "What is your name?" "Mara," she said. "Mara Holt. I was a traveling nurse. I was between assignments." "Can you stand if I support you?" I asked. "We can try." I helped her up carefully. She leaned heavily on my shoulder but stayed upright. I adjusted her arm around me to balance her weight, and we started toward the farm entrance. "Where are we going?" she asked, eyes scanning the surroundings. "To an old farmhouse that belongs to my family," I said. I decided not to mention the bunker yet. "It is off the road and secure. We can get you cleaned up and rested." She nodded slowly. I did not think anyone out here would still be around. "Neither did I, honestly," I said. The walk back to the house took more effort with her injured leg, but we made decent time. I kept the rifle ready and scanned the tree line constantly. Once inside the yard, I felt a slight easing in my chest. Familiar ground mattered. Inside the kitchen, I sat her in a chair and fetched water and a clean cloth. She dabbed at the cut on her head while I gathered a small first aid kit. The wound was shallow and stopped bleeding with a simple bandage. "This place is surprisingly tidy," she said, looking around. "No one here besides you?" "Not anymore," I said. "My grandfather passed a while back. I have been keeping the place up, more or less. And you stayed when everything else shut down." "I came here when it started to fall apart," I said. "Seemed safer than a city apartment." She nodded at that. "That was probably the best decision you could have made." I hesitated, then decided there was no real reason to hide the bunker's existence from her. If she stayed, she would see it. If she left, the chances of her leading hostile people back here were fairly low, given the way the world was going. "This house is not the only part of the property," I said. "There is a space below that I have prepared. It is safer than staying above ground." Mara studied my face for a moment. "You have a shelter?" "Yes." "With food? Water?" "Yes, and air filtration, power, the basics." She exhaled slowly, relief and surprise mixing in her expression. "I thought I was done for in that car. You picked a part of the world with good timing." "I prefer planning to improvising," I said. "Do you want to see the shelter now, or rest up here first?" "Shelter now," she said without hesitation. "I have seen enough houses for one lifetime." We moved through the house to the basement and root cellar. I showed her the concealed door. Her eyebrows rose at the level of construction. "You built this?" she asked. "Over a few years, yes," I said. The engineering work was straightforward. The hard part was hauling material without anyone wondering why I needed so much concrete. She gave a short, tired laugh. "I'm glad you did." Inside the bunker, her professional instincts as a nurse kicked in. She asked about air changes per hour, filter replacement schedules, and contamination risks. I showed her the sealed intake runs, the layered filters, and the negative pressure room I had improvised near the entrance for decontamination. Hearing those details seemed to calm her further. We settled into a routine surprisingly quickly. Mara cleaned and organized the medical supplies, setting up a dedicated shelf with labeled sections for bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, and antibiotics. She checked my stock against what would be needed if we had to treat more serious injuries. She also began writing notes on paper about infection signs she had seen in patients in the days before everything collapsed. Her experience in hospitals gave her an insight I lacked. In return, I walked her through the technical systems. I showed her how to monitor battery levels, how to switch the inverter from solar to generator, how to reset the well pump if it tripped a breaker. She listened closely, asked precise questions, and repeated procedures back until I was sure she could handle them alone. 4 days after Mara arrived, we gained another person. It was late afternoon when a small shape appeared at the edge of the field on the camera feed from the barn. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then the shape stood up straight and waved an arm in the direction of the house. I zoomed the camera as far as it would go. The image resolved into a teenage boy wearing a dirty hoodie and jeans. His hair was a mess, his face pale and drawn. He looked around nervously, then waved again, more urgently. "Someone is out there," I said to Mara, who was checking inventory at the shelves. "Alive?" she asked. "He looks alive," I said. "He's standing upright and moving normally." We both studied the feed. The boy turned his head, scanning the area, and fidgeted like someone who had not sat still in days. No vacant stare, no aimless shuffle. "We cannot ignore him," Mara said quietly. "If he has made it this far, he has likely seen things that would break most people." "I know," I said. "Let us see if we can bring him in without bringing anything else with him." I grabbed the rifle again and headed upstairs. Mara followed, carrying a pistol that had belonged to my grandfather. She handled it with careful respect, checking the chamber in a practiced way. At the back door, I paused and scanned the yard through the small window. No infected, no vehicles, only the distant figure near the barn. We stepped out and moved across the yard. As we approached, the boy's eyes widened with a mixture of relief and fear. "Hey!" I called when we were still a safe distance away. "We are friendly. Stay where you are for a second and tell us your name." "Caleb," he answered, voice raspier than it should have been. "Caleb Dunn. I lived a mile down the road. My parents' place." I knew the Dunn farm. It sat down County Road 7 on the opposite side. A white house with a red roof and a set of grain silos. I'd waved to Mr. Dunn a handful of times when we both happened to be at the mailbox. I had never seen their son up close, but I'd known they had a teenager. "How long have you been out here, Caleb?" Mara asked gently. "I was in the barn loft," he said. "Since the second day. My parents got sick. They told me to hide up there and not come out. I listened. I waited. I could hear things. I think they..." He trailed off, swallowing hard. I waited until it was quiet. Then I climbed down, grabbed a backpack and started walking. "I remembered your place, sir. My dad said you were always fixing things over here." "You did well staying hidden," I said. "You are not hurt?" He shook his head. "Just hungry and thirsty." "Then let us fix that," Mara said. We brought him into the house first, where he drank water so fast Mara had to remind him to slow down. We gave him a sandwich and some fruit. When he had eaten enough to think clearly, we asked for more details. He told us that his parents began showing signs of the infection about a day after the first official warnings went out. They had headaches, fevers, and confusion. When they started to act aggressively in ways that did not match their personalities, his father, who had always been practical, realized what was happening. He forced Caleb up into the barn loft with some supplies and told him to stay quiet. From there, Caleb heard noises he never wanted to describe in detail. Eventually, those noises stopped. The silence that followed lasted long enough for him to build the courage to leave. He had seen a few infected on the road, but managed to avoid them by hiding in ditches and moving through fields. He also saw a pickup truck with armed men drive past at high speed. They were shouting something he could not make out. One of them fired a gun at something in the corn. He did not stay to see more. "We are going to show you something," I said when his story tapered off. "There is a place here where we can stay safer than in the house." "The basement?" he asked. "Better than that," I said. When we revealed the bunker, Caleb's eyes widened the way Mara's had. Where she examined it with a professional eye, he reacted with a mixture of awe and relief. "This is like something out of one of those shows my dad watched," he said. "He always said real life never gives you this kind of setup." "Sometimes it does," I said, "but it takes a lot of work." With 3 people, the bunker's atmosphere changed. There was more noise, more conversation, more shared tasks. Mara taught Caleb basic first aid procedures and how to recognize signs of infection versus exhaustion or stress. I taught him how to monitor systems and use tools safely. He was quick to learn, eager to prove he was useful. We set up a daily schedule. Mornings were for checking property cameras, walking the interior perimeter of the house, and doing maintenance tasks. Midday hours were for planning and, when necessary, supply runs. Evenings were for cooking, cleaning, and quiet time, where we conserved power by dimming lights and running only essential systems. We could not live on stockpiled supplies forever. I had planned for one person for several months, possibly a year with strict rationing. Now there were 3 of us. The math shifted. Our first supply run as a group came a week after Caleb arrived. We went to his family farm. The Dunn property lay farther down County Road 7, past a bend. We watched the route carefully through the cameras and through a small spotting scope from an upstairs bedroom window. No infected, moved along the road as far as we could see. Still, we approached with caution. The Dunn farmhouse showed signs of struggle. One window was broken, the door frame splintered. Caleb tightened his jaw as we approached. "You do not have to go inside," Mara told him. "You can wait in the yard and keep watch." He shook his head. "I need to see. Even if they are not there anymore, I need to know." We entered the house with weapons ready. The interior was disordered. Furniture was out of place, some drawers pulled open. The marks on the walls and floors told the story without us needing to speak it out loud. There were no remains inside. Whether his parents had left the house as infected or had been moved afterward, we could not say. We focused on the practical. We found canned goods, sealed buckets of grain, and an agricultural-grade water tank in a shed out back that could be repurposed for our bunker. We also found tools, more wrenches, spare fasteners, fencing wire, and a small gasoline-powered water pump. We loaded what we could into my truck and into a small trailer from the Dunn property. Caleb moved through the task with a set expression, not looking too closely at anything that might bring fresh pain. Mara stayed near him more than she needed to, providing silent support. On the way back, we saw our first clear sign of other organized humans. A pickup truck approached from the opposite direction, moving more slowly than the one Caleb had seen earlier. There were 2 men in the cab and 1 in the bed, all armed with rifles. They watched us as they passed, eyes lingering on the trailer full of supplies. I nodded in what I hoped was a neutral, non-threatening way. The driver returned the nod, but there was something in his gaze that made my instincts tighten. "Who are they?" Caleb asked after they had gone by. "I do not know," I said. "But I suspect we are going to see them again." We did not have to wait long to learn their names. Back at Dustwood Farm, we unloaded the supplies, moved the water tank to the side of the house for later handling, and parked the trailer in the barn to hide it from plain view. That night, we tested the new setup for tripwire alarms. I had installed several low-profile tripwires around the main approaches to the farmhouse and barn. Thin fishing lines stretched between small stakes and fence posts at ankle height. Each line was connected to a repurposed door sensor wired into the bunker. If anything broke or moved the line, it would open the circuit and trigger a soft buzzer near the main console. Late that night, as we were settling down, the buzzer chirped once, then twice in rapid succession. I was on my feet before the second chirp ended. Mara and Caleb joined me at the console. The indicator light for the front yard tripwire glowed red. "Front of the house," I said. "Something just came through the yard." I pulled up the porch camera feed. The grainy night vision image showed 2 figures moving cautiously along the front of the house. Both carried rifles. A third man waited near the yard's edge beside a parked pickup truck, the same truck we had seen on the road earlier. "I know them," Caleb whispered. "Those are the ones who drove past." I recognized the driver's hat. The man in front, wearing that hat, a faded baseball cap, looked up at the windows, studying the boards and frames. He was in his 30s or early 40s, with a lean build and sharp features. The second man, broader in the shoulders, with a shorter haircut, tested the front door handle. It did not move. They talked quietly. I turned up the audio feed but could only catch a few words at first. "Place looks shut up tight. Must have supplies. Maybe a cellar." "These are the Fenn brothers," I said quietly, more to myself than to the others. I had heard the name in town before. 2 brothers, Randy and Cole Fenn, known for aggressive behaviour and a tendency to get into fights at bars. They did odd jobs and sometimes worked at construction sites in between stretches of unexplained income. I had never interacted with them directly, but I had seen them around. Now they were on my property at night, trying to get inside. We watched as they circled the house, testing windows and doors. They showed a professional caution that suggested this was not their first time checking a place for entry since the outbreak. They did not shout or make unnecessary noise. They moved with care, eyes scanning for movement. At one point, Randy crouched near the foundation, studying the ground. He shined a flashlight briefly along the base of the wall, but did not spot the subtle differences in the concrete near the root cellar entrance. Still, the way he looked made me uneasy. He seemed to sense that this place was more than it appeared. After a full circuit of the house and a short attempt at prying at the back door frame, they pulled back. They spoke clearly enough near the truck for the microphone to catch more of their conversation. "Place is solid," Randy said. "Someone has been working on it." "Yeah," Cole replied. Whoever it is has supplies. If we can find a way in, we are set. We will come back with better tools, Randy said. And maybe check that barn. Sometimes people hide things out there. They climbed into the truck and drove away with headlights off for the first 100 yards, then turned them on. Do you think they saw anything? Mara asked. Not yet, I said. But they suspect something. They will be back. What do we do? Caleb asked. We improve the defenses, I said. We make it harder to approach without tripping something, and we make sure that if anyone does get into the house, they still do not find the bunker easily. Over the next 2 days, we worked as if we were on a deadline, because we were. I added more tripwires along the driveway and near the barn. We mounted a high-intensity spotlight on the porch roof, wired into the battery system through a separate cable that bypassed the house interior. The spotlight could be triggered from the bunker. If it came on suddenly at night, it would disorient anyone approaching and make them visible on the cameras. Inside, we reinforced the basement door that led to the root cellar. I installed a steel bar across the back, anchored in concrete. Even if someone reached the root cellar, they would face a solid barrier without any obvious handles on the bunker door itself. I also painted over any hairline cracks that might betray the outline of the concealed entrance. Mara rotated the medical supplies, so the most critical items were easiest to grab in an emergency. Caleb built a simple rack near the emergency exit with backpacks pre-loaded with food, water, and basic gear. If we had to abandon the bunker in a hurry through the cornfield tunnel, we would not leave empty-handed. 2 days after their first visit, the Fenn brothers returned. The buzzer sounded shortly after midnight. This time, it was the driveway wire that tripped first, followed by the yard wire. They were moving more directly toward the house. We pulled up the porch feed, the same truck, the same 3 men. Only now, the man in the bed of the truck carried a long metal tool that looked like a pry bar or small crowbar. They walked with more confidence. Then, I said, they do not waste time. We watched them approach the front door. Before they could start prying, I reached over and flicked the switch for the spotlight. The high-intensity beam snapped on, turning the front yard into a wash of hard white light. The camera auto-adjusted to the brightness. The men froze, shielding their eyes. For a moment, everyone stood still. Then Randy turned toward the house and barked a short laugh that did not reach his eyes. Somebody is definitely home, he called aloud. We're not here to cause problems unless you make us. We just want to talk. His voice carried to the microphone and threw it into the bunker. It had an easy tone, but I heard calculation under it. Do we answer? Caleb asked. If we do not, they will not leave, Mara said quietly. If we pretend the place is empty, they already know that is not true. They will keep probing until they find something. She was right. People like the Fenn brothers did not give up easily when they suspected opportunity. I brought a handheld radio to my mouth and clicked it on. It was connected to a small speaker near one of the living room windows upstairs. I had installed it as a way to project sound without standing directly at a window. Now it gave me some distance. This property is occupied, I said. We have no interest in trouble. Move on and find another place. Randy turned toward the source of the voice. We are all in the same situation out here, he replied. We figured we could share what we have found. You let us in. We all benefit. You have a solid place. We have extra gear and manpower. I am sure you are very generous, I said evenly, but we cannot accommodate visitors. You need to leave. His smile faded slightly. You sure about that? It would be a shame if we had to treat this like an empty property. Empty places these days tend to lose doors and windows. That would be unwise, I said. The sound would draw the infected from miles around. I'm sure you have seen how they gather when they hear noise. Silence stretched while he thought that over. He was not foolish. Even if he was aggressive, he understood the risk. Fine, he said finally. Maybe you're right. Maybe we will give you some space, for now. He motioned to his brother and the third man. They backed away from the door, shielding their eyes again as they moved out of the spotlight beam. They climbed into the truck. Before they drove off, Randy looked back toward the house one more time. "See you around," he said softly. The truck rolled away. We watched until it disappeared from all camera views. "They are not done," Mara said. "No," I agreed. "They are just recalculating." We did not have much time to worry about them before a larger threat arrived. 3 days after the second visit from the Fenn brothers, the cameras began to pick up more infected on the roads. At first, just a few, then more. They moved in loose clusters, then in larger groups. Most came from the direction of town. Some drifted in from the fields, emerging from tree lines and hedgerows. By the afternoon of that day, we counted at least 50 in sight at once on various feeds. By evening, the number had doubled. They did not move with purpose, but they gradually oriented toward any sound or motion. A distant gunshot from somewhere out of view drew several of them in that direction. Shouting, carried faintly on the wind from some unknown confrontation, pulled more. By midnight, a full herd surrounded the Dustwood farm. I could not count them all. There were easily more than 200. We shut down all non-essential systems that created noise. The generators stayed off. Only the inverter hummed quietly. Inside the bunker, we spoke in low voices. The air intake fans continued at a reduced speed. I worried about the sound, but we had to balance stealth with breathable air. Above us, on the cameras, the infected moved around the house and barn. Some bumped into the walls, pressed against doors, or leaned against boarded windows. Most simply staggered back and forth, brushing against each other with slow, awkward steps. Their low vocal sounds created a constant background noise that made my skin tighten. "This many in one place," Caleb whispered, staring at the monitor. "How did they all end up out here?" "They probably followed scattered sounds from every direction," Mara said. "And once a group forms, they become their own noise source. People in town might have tried to fight or run, making more sound. The group just snowballed until it spilled into the countryside." We watched the screens for hours. None of us slept properly that night. The air in the bunker felt heavier than usual, even with the filters working. I kept checking the air exchange indicators. The ventilation system was designed to handle the load, but the awareness that hundreds of infected bodies stood above us still made me feel confined. By mid-morning the next day, some of the herd started to drift away. A few wandered blindly across fields in random directions, but the bulk of the group still clustered near the house, as if drawn to some faint trace of life inside. The boards on one of the back windows creaked under the pressure. At one point, the sound of something heavy falling on the porch made us all stiffen. On the camera, an infected had tripped over the step and crashed against the front door. The impact shook the frame, but did not break it. Still, every thud made me tally the tolerance of wood and nails in my head. The second night under the herd was worse. Fatigue made every sound feel sharper. The air in the bunker dried out more as the filters ran longer. Our water levels remained stable, but I could not shake the sense that we needed more redundancy. "Do you think they know we are here?" Caleb asked at one point. "I do not think they know anything in the way we understand it," Mara said. "But they react to some combination of sound and maybe scent. We have done all we can to mask both." "And if they do break in upstairs?" he asked. "Then they will find an empty house," I said. "That is why we are down here, not sleeping on the couch." We passed that night in shifts, taking turns watching the screens while others tried to rest. The constant, dull background noise of the herd became a kind of unpleasant rhythm. By late afternoon of the second day, the herd finally began to thin. Something drew their attention in the distance, maybe a distant engine or a structure collapsing. On one camera, we saw a group of them turn as one toward the south, then begin to move. More followed. The mass of infected slowly peeled away from the farm, drifting across the fields in a long, uneven line. "Good riddance," Caleb muttered, though his voice shook. "Let us not celebrate too soon," I said. "Some are still out there, and the people we saw before have not disappeared." The Fenn brothers returned the next day, and this time they did not come alone or in peace. We first spotted the truck on the road camera in the early afternoon. They were driving more slowly than before, scanning both sides of the road. On the bed of the truck, I noticed 2 extra fuel cans and a large toolbox. A 4th person rode in the back now, a younger man with a baseball bat. They passed a pair of infected on the roadside. The man in the back leaned out and struck one as they drove by, knocking it down. The other infected turned in their direction, arms raising, but the truck moved on before it could get close. "They are wasting energy on things that do not matter," Mara said. "That is not a good sign." The truck turned into our gravel drive. "They are coming here again," Caleb said. "And now most of those things are gone from the yard. They think the path is clear." I watched the feed as the truck rolled to a stop halfway up the driveway, just outside the range where the front yard tripwire would trigger. Randy climbed out, scanning the house with a satisfied expression. "This is it," he said to the others. "The herd made a mess, but they moved on. The place should be ripe for the taking." They did not approach the house immediately. Instead, they opened the toolbox and pulled out heavier equipment. A pry bar, a compact battery-powered saw, a sledgehammer. They were prepared to force entry. "We cannot let them start hacking up the doors and windows," I said. "Between the noise and the damage, we will be exposed." "What are our options?" Mara asked. "We can try the same thing we did last time," I said. "Talk to them, convince them to move on. But they have already shown that they interpret kindness as weakness. Or we can let them enter the house and deal with them closer. But that creates risk of them finding signs of the bunker." "There is a third factor now," Mara said, nodding toward the road camera. "We are not the only ones who noticed them." On the monitor, I saw movement farther down the road. A cluster of infected, about 10 or 12 at first, were drifting toward the sound of the truck. The man in the back had hit one earlier. Combined with the noise of the vehicle, that had likely drawn them. The infected were still some distance away, but they were orienting in this direction. "The herd never fully left," Caleb said. "Exactly," I said. "If the Fenn brothers start making more noise, they're going to pull a smaller herd right into the yard." Randy and his crew started toward the house, tools in hand. "It is almost time to decide," Mara said quietly. For a moment, everything seemed to converge at once. The Fenn brothers approached the front door. The infected down the road picked up a strange, shuffling pace. The memories of the last 2 nights of being surrounded pressed heavily on my thoughts. I realized that if we simply waited, the Fenn brothers would either breach the house and eventually discover the basement area, or retreat and return later with more people. Neither option was acceptable. We needed to end this standoff and preserve our ability to stay hidden. "We cannot let them take control of the house," I said. "If they root themselves in here, they will search every inch and eventually find a hint of what is below. We also cannot start a prolonged firefight. The noise will bring everything in the region down on us." "So what is left?" Mara asked. "We have one asset they do not know about," I said. "The diesel storage shed. On the far side of the property, near where the tree line met the field, an old equipment shed housed several fuel cans and a larger diesel storage tank. The tank fed a dispenser my grandfather once used for the tractor. I had kept it topped off, transferring fuel from smaller cans over time. It was shaded, out of the sun, and partly shielded by a berm. I had also run a buried conduit out to it for a small pump. That conduit, with a bit of work, could carry a remote ignition line. "You are thinking of a diversion," Mara said. "Yes," I said. "If we can lure the infected and the Fenn brothers toward that shed and trigger an explosion at the right moment, it will create enough chaos to draw everything away from the house and buy us a window to escape through the emergency tunnel. It will destroy a lot of fuel, which pains me, but keeping the bunker secret and preserving our lives matters more." "It will also destroy whatever is near the shed," Mara said, voice steady but somber. "I cannot see a way to avoid that," I said. "They have chosen." The smile faded slightly. "You sure about that? It would be a shame if we had to treat this like an empty property." Empty places these days tend to lose doors and windows. That would be unwise, I said. The sound would draw the infected from miles around. I'm sure you have seen how they gather when they hear noise. Silence stretched while he thought that over. He was not foolish. Even if he was aggressive, he understood the risk. Fine, he said finally. Maybe you're right. Maybe we will give you some space, for now. He motioned to his brother and the third man. They backed away from the door, shielding their eyes again as they moved out of the spotlight beam. They climbed into the truck. Before they drove off, Randy looked back toward the house one more time. "See you around," he said softly. The truck rolled away. We watched until it disappeared from all camera views. "They are not done," Mara said. "No," I agreed. "They are just recalculating." We did not have much time to worry about them before a larger threat arrived. 3 days after the second visit from the Fenn brothers, the cameras began to pick up more infected on the roads. At first, just a few, then more. They moved in loose clusters, then in larger groups. Most came from the direction of town. Some drifted in from the fields, emerging from tree lines and hedgerows. By the afternoon of that day, we counted at least 50 in sight at once on various feeds. By evening, the number had doubled. They did not move with purpose, but they gradually oriented toward any sound or motion. A distant gunshot from somewhere out of view drew several of them in that direction. Shouting, carried faintly on the wind from some unknown confrontation, pulled more. By midnight, a full herd surrounded the Dustwood farm. I could not count them all. There were easily more than 200. We shut down all non-essential systems that created noise. The generators stayed off. Only the inverter hummed quietly. Inside the bunker, we spoke in low voices. The air intake fans continued at a reduced speed. I worried about the sound, but we had to balance stealth with breathable air. Above us, on the cameras, the infected moved around the house and barn. Some bumped into the walls, pressed against doors, or leaned against boarded windows. Most simply staggered back and forth, brushing against each other with slow, awkward steps. Their low vocal sounds created a constant background noise that made my skin tighten. "This many in one place," Caleb whispered, staring at the monitor. "How did they all end up out here?" "They probably followed scattered sounds from every direction," Mara said. "And once a group forms, they become their own noise source. People in town might have tried to fight or run, making more sound. The group just snowballed until it spilled into the countryside. We watched the screens for hours. None of us slept properly that night. The air in the bunker felt heavier than usual, even with the filters working. I kept checking the air exchange indicators. The ventilation system was designed to handle the load, but the awareness that hundreds of infected bodies stood above us still made me feel confined. By mid-morning the next day, some of the herd started to drift away. A few wandered blindly across fields in random directions, but the bulk of the group still clustered near the house, as if drawn to some faint trace of life inside. The boards on one of the back windows creaked under the pressure. At one point, the sound of something heavy falling on the porch made us all stiffen. On the camera, an infected had tripped over the step and crashed against the front door. The impact shook the frame, but did not break it. Still, every thud made me tally the tolerance of wood and nails in my head. The second night under the herd was worse. Fatigue made every sound feel sharper. The air in the bunker dried out more as the filters ran longer. Our water levels remained stable, but I could not shake the sense that we needed more redundancy. "Do you think they know we are here?" Caleb asked at one point. "I do not think they know anything in the way we understand it," Mara said. "But they react to some combination of sound and maybe scent. We have done all we can to mask both." "And if they do break in upstairs?" he asked. "Then they will find an empty house," I said. "That is why we are down here, not sleeping on the couch." We passed that night in shifts, taking turns watching the screens while others tried to rest. The constant, dull background noise of the herd became a kind of unpleasant rhythm. By late afternoon of the second day, the herd finally began to thin. Something drew their attention in the distance, maybe a distant engine or a structure collapsing. On one camera, we saw a group of them turn as one toward the south, then begin to move. More followed. The mass of infected slowly peeled away from the farm, drifting across the fields in a long, uneven line. "Good riddance," Caleb muttered, though his voice shook. "Let us not celebrate too soon," I said. "Some are still out there, and the people we saw before have not disappeared." The Fenn brothers returned the next day, and this time they did not come alone or in peace. We first spotted the truck on the road camera in the early afternoon. They were driving more slowly than before, scanning both sides of the road. On the bed of the truck, I noticed 2 extra fuel cans and a large toolbox. A fourth person rode in the back now, a younger man with a baseball bat. They passed a pair of infected on the roadside. The man in the back leaned out and struck one as they drove by, knocking it down. The other infected turned in their direction, arms raising, but the truck moved on before it could get close. "They are wasting energy on things that do not matter," Mara said. "That is not a good sign." The truck turned into our gravel drive. "They are coming here again," Caleb said. "And now most of those things are gone from the yard. They think the path is clear." I watched the feed as the truck rolled to a stop halfway up the driveway, just outside the range where the front yard tripwire would trigger. Randy climbed out, scanning the house with a satisfied expression. "This is it," he said to the others. "The herd made a mess, but they moved on. The place should be ripe for the taking." They did not approach the house immediately. Instead, they opened the toolbox and pulled out heavier equipment: a pry bar, a compact battery-powered saw, a sledgehammer. They were prepared to force entry. "We cannot let them start hacking up the doors and windows," I said. "Between the noise and the damage, we will be exposed." "What are our options?" Mara asked. "We can try the same thing we did last time," I said. "Talk to them, convince them to move on. But they have already shown that they interpret kindness as weakness. Or we can let them enter the house and deal with them closer. But that creates risk of them finding signs of the bunker." "There is a third factor now," Mara said, nodding toward the road camera. "We are not the only ones who noticed them." On the monitor, I saw movement farther down the road. A cluster of infected, about 10 or 12 at first, were drifting toward the sound of the truck. The man in the back had hit one earlier, combined with the noise of the vehicle that had likely drawn them. The infected were still some distance away, but they were orienting in this direction. "The herd never fully left," Caleb said. "Exactly," I said. "If the Fenn brothers start making more noise, they're going to pull a smaller herd right into the yard." Randy and his crew started toward the house, tools in hand. "It is almost time to decide," Mara said quietly. For a moment, everything seemed to converge at once. The Fenn brothers approached the front door. The infected down the road picked up a strange, shuffling pace. The memories of the last 2 nights of being surrounded pressed heavily on my thoughts. I realized that if we simply waited, the Fenn brothers would either breach the house and eventually discover the basement area, or retreat and return later with more people. Neither option was acceptable. We needed to end this standoff and preserve our ability to stay hidden. "We cannot let them take control of the house," I said. "If they root themselves in here, they will search every inch and eventually find a hint of what is below. We also cannot start a prolonged firefight. The noise will bring everything in the region down on us." "So what is left?" Mara asked. "We have one asset they do not know about," I said. "The diesel storage shed. On the far side of the property, near where the tree line met the field, an old equipment shed housed several fuel cans and a larger diesel storage tank. The tank fed a dispenser my grandfather once used for the tractor. I had kept it topped off, transferring fuel from smaller cans over time. It was shaded, out of the sun, and partly shielded by a berm. I had also run a buried conduit out to it for a small pump. That conduit, with a bit of work, could carry a remote ignition line. You are thinking of a diversion, Mara said. Yes, I said. If we can lure the infected and the Fenn brothers toward that shed and trigger an explosion at the right moment, it will create enough chaos to draw everything away from the house and buy us a window to escape through the emergency tunnel. It will destroy a lot of fuel, which pains me, but keeping the bunker secret and preserving our lives matters more. It will also destroy whatever is near the shed, Mara said, voice steady but somber. I cannot see a way to avoid that, I said. They have chosen their path. We are choosing ours. Caleb swallowed hard. What do you need me to do? You will help Mara pack the emergency bags, I said. Get everything we can carry ready at the far end of the bunker near the exit tunnel. When I am done setting up the ignition, I will join you. What if something goes wrong? He asked. Then you follow Mara's lead, I said. She knows how to keep moving under pressure. I'm not leaving without you, he said quietly. We are not planning on leaving anyone behind, Mara said firmly. But we are not going to stand still and wait for someone else to make our choices for us. We moved quickly. I went to the workshop and gathered materials. A length of heavy gauge wire, electrical connectors, a manual switch, and a basic detonator I had put together months earlier for controlled burns of brush piles. Never intended for this scale, but adaptable. In the bunker's utility room, I shut off all non-essential outgoing power lines, rerouting capacity where needed. Above, the Fenn brothers had reached the front porch. The audio feed picked up the solid thud of the sledgehammer against the doorframe. The boards held on the first strike. On the second, a crack appeared in one board. On the third, a section of wood split near the lock. At the same time, the infected group on the road had grown, more joined from side paths and ditches. They moved toward the truck, drawn by the sound of tools striking wood, and occasional shouted comments from the men. I went out through the basement and exited the house through a back hatch that emerged near the foundation, shielded from a direct line of sight to the front. Keeping low, I moved along the side of the house, then cut toward the tree line, using bushes for cover. I carried a small toolkit, the coil of wire, and the detonator parts in a backpack. The semi-automatic rifle hung at my side, ready. The infected were still far enough away that their attention stayed on the truck and the noise at the house. The men on the porch had not yet broken through fully. I used that narrow window to reach the diesel shed. Inside the shed, the air smelled of fuel and old wood. The tank stood against the back wall, a squat metal cylinder with thick hoses attached. I had already run electrical lines to power the pump. I opened the control box and examined the circuits. It did not take long to integrate the detonator into the system, using the heavy gauge wire as an ignition route. I placed a small explosive charge near the tank's outer shell, where it would breach the casing without pulverizing the entire area. The fuel would do the rest when it vaporized and found a spark. I worked with steady hands, reminding myself of all the times I had wired up circuits under pressure in my professional life. Mistakes here would not be acceptable, but panic would only increase the chance of mistakes. When I finished, I tested the continuity of the line back toward the house with a handheld meter. The readings were solid. Outside, the pounding on the front door grew louder. With a final check of the connections, I closed the control box, exited the shed, and ran the wire along the ground toward the tree line, burying it shallowly under loose soil where I could. Near the edge of the yard, I connected it to the manual switch and concealed both near a stump. From that vantage point, I could see the front of the house partially. The Fenn brothers had finally broken through the front door. They stepped inside cautiously, rifles raised. Their third man stayed near the truck, watching the road with divided attention. The infected had closed to within 50 yards of the driveway, more joining behind them. I could not let the men spend too long inside. They might find the basement door, and even if they did not, the infected would eventually reach the house itself, creating a chaotic mix of threats. I retreated back to the basement hatch, slipped inside, and closed it behind me. The house interior felt strangely empty now, the front door hanging askew, daylight streaming in through the broken boards. I heard muffled curses and comments from the intruders as they moved from room to room upstairs. "Place looks recently lived in," Randy said. "Food crumbs, water glasses, footprints in the dust. They bailed when the herd showed up. Bet they come back when things clear." "Maybe they have a stash in the cellar," Cole replied. "Farmhouses always have cellars." My heart rate increased. I moved quickly and quietly down into the basement, closing doors behind me. From there, I descended into the bunker and sealed the heavy door. Inside, the air felt charged with tension. "Everything set?" Mara asked. "Yes," I said. "The line is run. The charge is in place. Once they are in the right position and the infected are close enough, we trigger it and use the confusion to get out through the tunnel." Caleb stood beside the rack of backpacks near the emergency exit. He wore his hoodie, now with a small pack strapped over it, and a determined expression. "Are you sure the explosion will draw them away and not toward the bunker exit?" he asked. "The shed is far enough from the grain chute that the main blast and fire will be on the opposite side of the property," I said. "The noise and light will pull everything that can move in that direction. We will be going the other way." We moved to the monitor and watched. Upstairs, the Fenn brothers had reached the basement door. I watched them test the handle. It held. They pounded on it and cursed. "There is something down there," Cole said. "No one puts this much effort into a basement door unless they are hiding something." "Later," Randy said. "We need to make sure that nothing is going to sneak up on us first. The place is wide open now." He was right to be concerned. On the porch camera, we saw an infected figure appear at the edge of the yard and stagger up onto the steps. The third man near the truck swung his bat at it and managed to knock it down, but more were coming. "This is it," I said. "We wait until the largest part of the group is near the shed area, then trigger. They will be drawn by the fire and noise." We switched to the camera that covered the field and tree line near the shed. The infected had not yet reached that side, but they were spreading out as they closed in on the property. Some paused near the driveway. Others moved toward the barn. A few drifted toward the back of the house. "Come on," Caleb whispered under his breath. "Move that way." The Fenn brothers, hearing the growing noise outside, retreated from the basement door and moved back toward the front of the house. "Too many of them," Cole said, glancing through a gap in the boards. "We need to reposition." "To where?" the third man asked. "They're all over the yard. We can fall back to the barn," Randy said. "Use the truck as cover if we have to, or head toward the trees." The trees, the same general direction as the shed. The situation aligned, not because of any plan of theirs, but because pressure from the infected forced them to move. They exited the house through the front door, took one look at the cluster of infected near the porch, and fired a few shots to clear space. The gunfire sounded sharp through the bunker walls. The infected reacted, turning sharply toward the source. "Noise like that will bring more in from every direction," Mara said. "I know," I said, "which is why we are going to give them a louder noise to chase." On the monitor, we watched the three men fight their way toward the truck. They fired in short bursts, trying not to waste ammunition. Bodies fell and impeded movement. The infected stumbled over each other. It became a slow, uneven retreat. Instead of getting into the truck, the men veered toward the side yard, likely realizing that trying to start the engine and drive through the growing cluster was risky. That path took them closer to the tree line and, by extension, the shed. The infected followed in a loose arc. "Almost," I said, watching the camera near the shed. Within a minute, the leading edge of the infected wave reached the area just outside the shed. The men ran past it, using the structure as partial cover as they fired. Several infected drew close enough to press against the shed's walls. "Now," Mara said. I grabbed the manual switch connected to the detonator line. I waited long enough to ensure the largest possible cluster was near the shed, without being too late for the men's position. Then I flipped the switch. Even through the concrete layers of the bunker, we felt the explosion. It started as a hard thud in the soles of my feet, followed by a low, rolling vibration in the air. On the monitor, the camera near the shed flared white for an instant as the bright flash overwhelmed the sensor. The power to that camera cut out completely as the blast wave hit. The porch camera showed more detail. A dull roar rolled across the yard. A wave of dust, smoke, and debris rose above the tree line in the direction of the shed. The infected nearest that side were knocked off their feet. Others turned sharply toward the source of the noise, beginning to move in that direction with renewed agitation. In the cloud of smoke and dust along the edge of the yard, I thought I saw one of the men stumble and disappear. The others might have been caught in the blast, or the immediate aftermath of the flaming fuel. There was no way to be certain from this angle. What was certain was that the explosion had achieved its primary purpose. Everything that could move was now focused away from the house. The fire from that is going to burn hot for a while, Mara said. We will not have long before the wind shifts and carries smoke back toward us. Then it is time, I said. Grab the packs. We're going out through the tunnel. We moved quickly to the far end of the bunker. The emergency exit hatch that led up to the grain chute in the cornfield sat behind a steel door secured with interior bolts. I undid them, lifted the hatch, and felt a rush of cooler air from above. No sound of infected reached us directly here. Only the faint crackle of distant fire and a low background roar. We move in a low profile, I said. Stay close, keep voices down. Once we're out, we head through the cornrows away from the farm, then angle toward the back road that leads to the ridge. From there, we can decide where to go next. Caleb nodded, gripping the straps of his pack. Mara checked her pistol and adjusted the sling of the small bag of medical supplies. After all the work we did here, Caleb began, then trailed off. I know, I said, but a place is only as good as its security. Right now, the house is breached. There are hostile people who know this property exists, and the herd has shown that it can reach us even out here. Starting somewhere else with knowledge and experience gives us a better chance than waiting underground for the next wave. I understand, he said quietly. We climbed the stairs one by one. At the top, my hand pushed up on the disguised hatch in the base of the grain chute. Rusted metal scraped lightly as it moved. I held still for a moment, listening. No immediate reaction. No nearby voices or footsteps. I eased the hatch open further, just enough to slip through. The cornfield around us rustled in the light wind. The sky was hazy. A distant column of dark smoke rose from the direction of the diesel shed. The air smelled faintly of burned fuel and hot metal. No infected were visible between the rows near us. The main cluster remained on the other side of the property, drawn to the ongoing blaze. I stepped out and helped Mara and Caleb up beside me. We closed the hatch and covered it with a layer of loose stalks as an extra precaution. Then we began to move. We stayed low between the cornrows, using them as cover. Every few steps, I paused to check for movement through gaps in the plants. Occasionally, a distant figure moved along the horizon or near the distant tree line, but none came close. Our timing had been as good as we could make it. As we put distance between ourselves and the farm, the sound of the fire behind us faded a little. The sense of loss did not. I wish we could have taken more, Caleb said after several minutes of quiet walking. Me too, I said, but we took the most important part. What is that? He asked. Our lives, Mara said simply, and what we have learned. We eventually reached the back road that wound through a low ridge behind the farm properties. From there, we had a view down over the fields. We could see the smoke from the shed, the small shape of the farmhouse, and scattered infected moving in confused patterns toward the now dying blaze. The bunker is still underground, Caleb said. Do you think anyone will ever find it? Maybe if someone excavates or if the house decays enough to expose clues, I said. But without electricity, water, and air systems maintained, it will just be another buried space. We made use of it when we could. Now we move on. Where to? He asked. North for now, I said. Away from the worst of the spread. Towards smaller towns, maybe people who built places of their own. The world is different now. A single hidden base was never going to be the final answer. It is one chapter in a much longer story. We walked in silence for a while after that, each of us processing our own thoughts. The road ahead was uncertain and would be full of new dangers, but the skills we had used at Dustwood Farm, the planning, the building, the willingness to help others and to make hard choices, would go with us. I looked back one last time at the farm where I had poured years of effort. The smoke from the destroyed fuel shed drifted upward in a dark column. The house stood as a small shape on the horizon. Somewhere beneath it, the bunker waited in the dark, its shelves lined with whatever supplies we had not had time to carry. It had done its job. It had carried us through the first days of the outbreak, given us shelter and time to learn. Now the world above demanded that we keep moving. My name is Evan Mercer, I thought, adjusting the straps of my pack. I built a hidden base beneath an old farmhouse. It helped me survive when the dead started to walk. Now I'm taking that knowledge and the people I saved and heading into whatever comes next. I turned away from the view of Dustwood Farm and focused on the road ahead. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.